to honor your requests and pull some more of that content in. Just a reminder or two, guys, because we were all coming in at different times. After we finish up Chapter 6, which we're going to try to finish up today, our test is going to be either next Monday or next Wednesday. We'll take a vote on Wednesday about that this week to determine when that's going to be. A reminder, you don't have class this Friday. So no class this Friday as per our negotiation, so that we'll be off this Friday. Guys, in terms of other things that are happening, next couple of days I do hope to have a final plan for what the rest of the semester is going to look like. We did have a proposal that was brought up by one of our bargaining caucuses when they got here this morning to suggest that perhaps we do the collective bargaining exercise in class and do the final exam as an online final during the time it is scheduled. I'm open to that idea, very much so, but I do need to make sure that I'm not going to be putting myself in hot water based on some of the requirements of the administration. So I'll be checking on that, and I'll be getting back to you because I love the idea. So we'll see what we can make happen. At this point, though, if nothing changes, we're on to do our collective bargaining exercise at 8 a.m. on 12/13. So hopefully we can make that change. Just a reminder, guys, your assignment is due this Wednesday. So please don't be late on this, guys. It's a very tight week for me, and I'd love to be able to do grading very quickly. Remember, you have a choice between two exercises. If you choose the New York Times exercise, more power to you. If you choose the exercise B about social media, that's okay as well. I'm not going to cover the exercises again because we covered them in significant depth. We're going to be moving very quickly today, guys, because I really do want to finish this chapter today so we at least can get started onto our next chapter on Wednesday, plus a review of the material in this chapter. Guys, in terms of things that affect our bargaining power, if you have a public union, for example, if we say the National Education Association and they're lobbying for higher wages for a series of public schools, and they get those higher wages, how do those wages occur? How do school districts raise wages? What can they do to make more money? They can raise taxes, exactly right. If you have somebody who's in the private sector, however, and you're making cars or refrigerators or industrial goods, how do you make the money that you need to raise wages? What else probably has to go up? Price of the goods and services you're producing. So it really depends in terms of if you're in a unionized industry, can your industry bear some increased costs or not? If you were in education, we used this example previously, from the 90s up around until 2010 or so, it was pretty easy to do because everybody was willing to pay more and more for a college education. We're hitting the price ceiling now with many people of what they're willing or able to pay, meaning that those unions may not have the bargaining power that they once had. If you're General Motors, and you've got the United Auto Workers who are trying to get better pay, global competition means you've got other folks outside of the company, outside of the country in this instance, who can do what you do. And we also come down to government regulations and controls. What those things mean, for example, how far can you push your collective bargaining from either side before it becomes an unfair labor practice? Some of the other things, too. Why did General Motors weather the storm with the United Auto Workers pretty well? What enabled them to go a month without having production? Anybody know? Yes? They had a lot of cars and trucks sitting on dealer lots, meaning if you wanted a blue Chevy Silverado four-door with a diesel and dual exhausts, generally speaking, probably somebody in the country had it. You know what no dealer had, though? A truck with a manual transmission. Because it's 2019 and Americans hate manuals. I know. I feel your pain. So you can't get a manual transmission. The last full-size manual transmission truck in the United States sold as a 2019 model. It was a Dodge 2500. I know, I was looking it up. Had a beautiful 6-speed jet drag manual. Jet drag, is that how you say it? Jet drag. And never again will you get a manual transmission in a truck in the United States. Woe are we. So those are company-specific factors, for example, that General Motors was able to weather that storm because they had enough inventory. Now, then we also get into what we refer to as intra-organizational bargaining. What that means, guys, let's say we're all in the union together. Is there a possibility we all have different opinions on the way this should go down? Yeah, if we're getting in. We've got folks over here who say healthcare is our number one issue. Will you guys say that after me? Healthcare is our number one issue. These guys sound sick. You guys over here, you want bigger paychecks.
Bigger paychecks. Bigger paychecks.
Exactly. I'm trying. It's Monday, I know. My point is, that if you go and have a united front against your opponent, you're going to do better, which means within the organization, you're going to have to go off and bargain by yourselves to figure out what your priorities are. Let's put it this way. Let's say everybody in here decided that they wanted to move the date of the final, and you figure you could all gang up on me to make it happen. Some people want the final to be on Wednesday, some people want it on Thursday, for example. Is it going to be more powerful if you come in here divided or as a united front? Exactly, because while you two guys are fighting whether it's going to be Wednesday or Thursday, I'm going to try to sneak out the door to safety so I don't get beat up. So it comes down to you want a united front. That's why we have intra-organizational bargaining. Smart unions and smart companies will do this stuff. In terms of ways that we are not really supposed to bargain, emotional manipulation. I know we say in our textbook that that is an unacceptable bargaining technique. It still happens, guys. When we start talking about emotional manipulation, it could mean, for example, if we're talking about our union health care benefits, we want to keep a negotiator maybe citing several people who have incredibly life-threatening conditions and trying to pull upon the heartstrings of management to say, hear this sad, sad song of woe that I'm playing for you. If you don't give us this healthcare package, Tiny Tim is going to die. You know, and nobody wants Tiny Tim to die, so it gets into emotional manipulation, for example. Here's where we get into the big stuff. Misrepresenting information. If you're lying to your opponent, if you're presenting costs that are not realistic, whether you are management, whether you're labor, that's not acceptable. Inappropriate information gathering. Okay, let's talk about that for a minute, guys. Do you remember when we had our guest speaker for the United Mine Workers? He referenced some non-Google ways of finding information. Specifically, what was he talking about? How was he getting information on some of his opponents? He was actually digging through people's trash. I think that most people would say that's probably inappropriate information gathering. Eavesdropping, tapping phone lines, trying to get people to speak when they don't know you're around. That's inappropriate information gathering. And by the way, if we're in this class and I have my phone on and I'm recording what you say without your consent, is it admissible in court as evidence? Generally speaking, it is not. Unless I have a search warrant, it is not. Then we also have bluffing. It means it's good in poker, for example, but it's bad if you're making a threat or a promise that you don't have any intention on carrying through on. At worst, they'll call your bluff and you're going to look weak. At best, if you say you're going to do something that you know you're not going to do, you're really in a bad potential situation. As the old expression goes, your mouth is writing checks that your butt can't cash. Nobody wants to be in that situation. That's not an official labor relations management term. Guys, in terms of professional standards, whether you're negotiating for the union or whether you're negotiating for the employer, your goal is to get as much for your party as you can. That's just the way it is. Being direct and upfront about it is okay. For example, if we're negotiating and Emily here is a representative of the union and I'm a representative of management, what are you trying to get for your people? Better wages, better health care, all these things. If I'm the employer, this side of the room, we're the employer against Emily's union, what are we trying to get? What do we ultimately want?
More efficiency.
We want more efficiency. We want to keep more of our money. So by being upfront and being honorable about what we're about, we can have a better negotiation and we can do it with honesty and respect. By the way, guys, I see as one of the biggest problems we have in the United States right now, in general, is not that we disagree. Disagreeing is American. There is nothing unpatriotic about disagreeing with somebody. The problem we have in this country is a lack of respect and an ability to discuss our differences in a respectful manner. I don't care who you vote for. I don't care what your political beliefs are, your beliefs on any of these hot-button issues. What I do care about is somebody's ability to be able to sit down and talk about them with decorum. I have a friend who I have lunch with every 4 or 5 weeks because he keeps me on point. His political beliefs are 180 of mine. He believes almost the exact opposite I do on everything. And I have lunch with him, and we talk about it as civilized human beings, and he's my friend. So I don't have to believe everything he believes for him to be my friend. And it's the same with a union and labor and management negotiators. You can show respect to your opponent. Am I right? Yeah, and this one I don't often say, yeah, I'm right, but I'm right on this one. And I hope that you guys feel that way about it too. Last rant of the day. You know why I have so much hope for you guys, by the way, in terms of like what you're going to do for the world? Because of your lack of dogmatic affiliation with political parties. I know everybody in this room belongs to a political party, and that's cool. But I also see you guys as people who take on issues instead of taking on dogmatic stances. That's why I have so much hope for you guys. I want you to get involved in politics. What I just described, in terms of showing some level of respect, is what we call good faith bargaining. It means, can you at the end of that session shake somebody's hand and realize you've been honest with them and they've been honest with you, even if you disagree? You're going in there with the idea we're going to solve a problem. If you have no intention of solving that problem the moment you walk in the door, you are operating in bad faith. When we talk about the totality of conduct, what that means is if we looked at this situation, this negotiation between labor and management, and we had what we refer to as the 30,000-foot view. Has anybody ever heard of that term? You'll hear it all the time in business. If somebody says we're looking at the 30,000-foot view, what we're looking at is if we took ourselves away from the situation, what will we see? The old cliche is you can't see the forest through the trees. If you take yourself away from it and you looked from the sky at how these two parties were interacting, were they being nice? Were they being respectful? It's not to say we can't disagree, but the totality of conduct means basically, were you being honest and good most of the time whenever you were negotiating? People get fired up, man. By show of hands, when you were angry, have you ever said something you regret? Yeah, and it's a hell of a thing in relationships with friendships when we say things we wish we could take back. When we get into bargaining, however, it can affect the outcome. So in terms of violations of good faith bargaining, things that we cannot take back on occasion, the nature of the bargaining issues. If I'm going in as management saying, I hate these SOBs and I am not giving them a raise, I'll close this damn company before I give anybody another 10 cents an hour. That nature of the bargaining issue, your approach to it means you're not going to get anywhere. You're operating in bad faith. We're going to talk about per se violations here in a moment. Have you heard the expression, that's not a violation per se? What does that mean? What's another word for per se? Elliot, it's right on the tip of your tongue.
I feel like whenever someone says, well, that's not per se a bad thing, it's kind of like people when they say it's just a slap on the wrist issue versus an actual issue. I mean, there's still an issue, but how hard are they going to come down on it?
So it's a per se violation. It's not an issue inherently, but it's how you conduct yourself. We talked about the totality of conduct, and we also talked about, for example, violations of good faith bargaining can also mean, and we're going to talk about this too, if you're a new employer taking over a factory, there are situations in which the existing union has to be given good faith consideration. So if you have a new employer coming in, taking over a plant that's nothing else is changing but the owner, you may still have that union and you may have to honor the collective bargaining agreement, and your intention to route that when you come in could indicate bad faith. So things that you cannot talk about, illegal subjects, obviously, things that we can't bargain about. If I'm a plant owner, and let's see, who's our union rep over here? Emily is our union rep, and I say, well, Emily, here's the deal on this whole thing. The people are okay, but I don't want any women working in my factory. What's your response to that going to be? Other than tell me to go to hell. What's going to be your response? Okay. It's not going to work. Why? Because it is, which is illegal. So we're not going to talk about that. So that's a pretty extreme example. A more realistic example might be, for example, if the union is saying we want people to have to be a member of the labor union before they can get hired there. That's inherently illegal. You can't do it. Some of the things that we get into, however, are what we refer to as mandatory subjects. Let's think about this for a second, because we've got our union and we've got management here. Off the top of your head, what are going to be the most important things we're going to talk about? What are going to be the big issues? Like if we have the union, we have management. What are the big things that everybody cares about?
Pay and benefits.
Pay and benefits. There it is. Conditions of work, safety. Yes.
I was going to say conditions of work and hours required.
Exactly right. Those are big important things. Some minor bargaining issues is how many days of the week are we going to have chicken patty sandwiches available in the dining hall? Or what color our new coverall is going to be if we're in a shop. Those are minor optional bargaining issues. They're not a big deal. Anything that involves wages, hours, benefits, that's the big stuff. And these are issues, which means that the expression is that they can be bargained to impasse. That means that if we can't figure them out, they can come to a strike. They can come to a complete disagreement. If we're going on strike over the color of coveralls or the number of times a week we're having chicken patty sandwiches, we're bargaining over the wrong issues. We can't take those to impasse. If we can't come to some conclusions on pay and benefits, definitely. Then we get into what we refer to as voluntary subjects, and those are things like how many times we're having chicken in the dining hall and what color our uniforms are going to be. Those are voluntary issues that don't necessarily have to be part of a collective bargaining agreement. So I won't cover this whole list, but you can see it right in your text. These are mandatory issues. The idea of hours of pay. What are your rest periods going to be? What kind of rights does management have? How do we get bonuses? How do our health care work? Anything that really directly affects somebody's terms and conditions of employment is a mandatory bargaining subject. So in terms of per se unfair labor practices, per se means if you are refusing to meet with the union, if you just won't meet with a member of the union or their bargaining group, that's a management per se unfair labor practice. And inherently, if Kenny and I are supposed to meet and I just don't show up, that's not really me changing the terms of and conditions of his employment, but it's an unfair labor practice per se because I didn't show up. I didn't insult him. I didn't bargain in bad faith. I just didn't show up. So that would be an example. Implementing a wage change without consulting the union. In other words, we're going into collective bargaining, and all of a sudden everybody in the plant got a $2 an hour pay raise before we start to negotiate. Do you think some people in the union might feel more favorably toward the employer? Yeah, I think they would. So, for example, if we were getting ready to do some hard-nosed bargaining, and what was your big issue over here? What we were all concerned about was healthcare. Well, our management team over here says, well, we're getting into an expensive bargaining proposition, so what the hell? We're going to give a $2.50 an hour, not a day, an hour raise to everybody, so that the rank and file here will be softies when it comes to negotiating. That is also a per se unfair labor practice. You see why that is an unfair labor practice. It's not to say at other times you can't give raises, but you do it based on a schedule. If we reach a bargaining impasse on what we refer to as a non-mandatory issue, if I'm the union or if I'm management and I force it to a head on the chicken sandwich issue, yeah, that's a per se violation. Well, in this case, it's management. And also, if I refuse to give the information you need to bargain, that's a per se violation. Well, here's the trick. Yes, sir.
So when you said about how that's an unfair labor practice, I thought about the video with the Chinese company. So is that technically a unfair labor practice when right before they started to get into a union vote, they're like, let's raise it $2?
Dude, that guy was a walking unfair labor practice. The guy who owned that company, I mean, he didn't even want there to be fire alarms in the walls. I mean, it's like, I don't know. I mean, when I say this with respect to other cultures, he did not understand U.S. labor culture one iota, and he was breaking the law constantly. He was on camera basically saying, yeah, we get a union here. You guys are losing your jobs. Yes? No. If you're operating in the United States, you've got to comply with whatever labor laws in the state you're operating. So, I mean, I think that if it came down to something like good or bad faith, let's say, for example, the head of that company genuinely was that clueless about U.S. labor law, and you're going into a meeting with the NLRB, once or twice they might say, look, we realize you're new to the system, you're learning the law. What the NLRB is assuming, if you're operating in the United States, that you've hired lawyers and a legal team that's going to educate you and keep you in compliance, they're not going to show a whole lot of sympathy. And I don't know, if I were the lawyer for that company who advised them that, yeah, filming this documentary is a fantastic idea. It's going to really play well for you guys. I don't think that lawyer would be somebody I'd hire a second time. Yeah, that was, I don't know. it's like putting yourself on report repeatedly and putting it on a streaming service where literally tens of millions of people can watch you commit crimes on camera. Yes?
Why hasn't no one reported him?
I bet somebody has. I bet he's been reported at some point. Yeah, it's interesting. Avery, we should have you, when you go home for Thanksgiving, man, are you going to potentially run into any of the folks who were in that film?
Probably.
Can you give us a status report when you get back in terms of like what it's like there? I don't want to put anything on you. I know that's a vacation and everything. If you happen to run into them, would you tell them that the class watched the film? We're dying to know what it's like there right now. Fair enough. All right, guys. Let's move on. We're going to be, hopefully, with a little bit of luck, we're going to be finishing this chapter today. We're moving at a pretty good clip. Guys, in terms of the union, per se, unfair labor practices, if you are insisting on a closed shop, because remember, that term, we allow you to interchange it, but if they're basically saying you got to do something illegal, which is require people to be members of the union before they're hired, no, you can't do that. If you're refusing to meet with the employer to negotiate, that's also an unfair labor practice. And if you are refusing to talk about a mandatory bargaining subject, for example, if we're saying healthcare is a very important part of our negotiation, and the union lawyer basically says, we're not going to talk to you about healthcare. We are not talking about healthcare in this negotiation. That is a per se unfair labor practice. That makes sense, guys? Basically, it's saying you got to talk about these things. You have to pull this stuff together. We also have, I know we talked about the totality of conduct. All that means is, for example, if we're in this bargaining procedure and we've got an NLRB, a National Labor Relations Board observer, who's seeing that one party is really trying to participate and the other is refusing, they can come in and intervene and basically make the parties come to some sort of agreement. We can even get into what we refer to as forced arbitration, which means if it's that bad during the negotiations, we're going to force you guys to sit down and do binding arbitration, which means we're going to set terms and conditions, and we're going to make you talk about this stuff. Not a good place to be. When we have something called bulwarism, it's a wonderful word. It means basically if you have one party who's refusing to consider modification of any part of the proposal, they're basically saying, we're not going to talk about this. It's a per se violation, and it's also referred to as bulwarism. And it's a hard word to say. So if you're refusing to talk at all, we're getting into that sort of stuff. Then we also get into some other kinds of bad faith bargaining. If you're going through the motions, if you're basically saying, yeah, we can get together and we talk about it, but you know where I stand on the issue. Anybody ever had that kind of conversation with a friend or significant other where you knew you're going to talk, but nobody's really going to change your mind anyway? Yeah, we all been in that movie. And you're sitting there the whole time, and you're kind of half-assing it because you realize what you say doesn't matter anyway. So we call that surface bargaining. And that means, for example, we're going to talk about it, but we know we don't really care. The marriage is over. It's not going to last. The good times are behind us. All we are now is cohabitating in the same space where we used to be filled with such joy and love and hope for the future. Now it is a hollow shell of what once was. That's kind of what you have when you have this situation. Maybe I have another career writing soap operas or something. That'd be great. You know, that sounds very nice and flowery. Sometimes I'll tell you guys some jokes about marriage too, but it's not when I'm recording on the microphone. The other things we have too, guys, dilatory tactics. That sounds so wonderful. I love that word. Have you ever heard somebody say, "Oh, they're just dilly-dallying"? That's where it comes from. What does dilly-dallying mean, by the way? Yes. Yeah, you just sit around, not doing much, spinning in this chair around because I don't feel like talking in class anymore. I feel like just wandering around thinking about the next romance novel I'm going to write because apparently I'm good at it. I'm dilly-dallying around here, so I'm procrastinating to try to drag this class out as long as I can. Oh, wait, you're still here. So dilatory tactics, that's an example. I'm glad you guys are here. And then we also have what we refer to as imposing unreasonable conditions. If you are, let's say, for example, we've got, I don't know, 30 people who are coming to bargain together, and we say, okay, this is fine. We're going to meet over in Randy Fry's conference room over there that can comfortably seat 8 people. That would be considered to be imposing unreasonable conditions on bargaining because nobody wants to be there. It's tight and it's uncomfortable. So some additional bad faith bargaining. We're going to cover this slide. We're going to take a breather for a second and take a question. unilateral changes in conditions. And what we mean there is basically, if we're changing the conditions around you before we can even bargain them. The idea of giving somebody a $2 an hour raise without talking about the union. That would be an example of a unilateral condition unilateral change in condition, because you're changing what's happening around you that you're trying to actually negotiate. And then also the idea of unfair labor practices. If you are actually paying people to come in and commit unfair labor practices, whether it is the idea of distributing anti-union literature within 24 hours of an election, or telling people they're going to lose their job because they voted for a union, all these sorts of things. So before we continue, guys, we're right where we need to be time-wise. I would like a question or a comment while I take a sip of my coffee. What would you like to ask or say? What is on your minds? Some of you look like you're putting real thought into this question today. What would you like to ask? Yes, sir.
If a generous donor donated to the school business like those musical lights like hang up in the front of the building, and like reacts to the music, do you think that'd be an awesome idea?
Like so we would do some sort of like really big gaudy like animated display in front of the school business?
Absolutely.
I get behind that, yeah. Like what would it be? What kind of music?
Whatever you want.
I'm thinking Trans-Siberian Orchestra. Something just over the top that doesn't fit with this building at all. Just so long as it's not like stuff like Dominic the Donkey. Like that's like the worst Christmas song in the history of Christmas songs. Or All I Want for Christmas Is My Two Front Teeth. Like that one makes me want to kick a puppy. Like I hate that song so much. But yeah, I could get behind something gaudy and ridiculous. Maybe some inflatables too. Like what would be good inflatables to have in front of Schwab Hall? Perfect.
Seen that one?
Yeah, I've seen one where Santa comes out of a trailer too. That'd be good. Did I tell you guys in this class what I put on my porch for Christmas? If I did, I apologize. My wife and I are we have very unusual senses of humor. And years ago for another event, I bought a Darth Vader inflatable, like Darth Vader from the Star Wars movies. And so we put him on our porch for Christmas. And what we do, we cover him in tinsel, and we hang a little Christmas ball behind him as though it's the Death Star. And so that's our Christmas decorations outdoors. Sorry, maybe that's too much information. Nothing really brings home the meaning of the season quite like a Sith Lord on your front porch. So, oh well, people do other things that I don't think really agree with the holiday either. Okay, we're going to finish this chapter hell or high water today, guys, because we're on the right path to get it done. When we go into negotiations, here's the trick. Management does have rights. We have a company, so we're advocating for ourselves, basically saying we still have to have some freedom in this process to back up what's good for the company. Things that are good for the company. Making a profit is good for the company. Remaining solvent is good for the company. Being able to invest in new facilities and new technologies is good for the company. And this power comes from whoever owns the property. For example, does the company actually own the property where the factory stands? And what we refer to as the laws of agency, and that means who's actually responsible for the property and operations. Well, ultimately, if you're Ford Motor Company, even if you don't own the land where your factory is, if you're leasing it, you're still probably contractually responsible to take care of the land, to make sure it's a safe working environment, all these sorts of things. And basically, you remember we were talking about how somebody's power and rights extend to the point where somebody else is willing to force them off. Friedrich Nietzsche would have called that the will to power. Here we're calling this the reserved rights doctrine. The reserved rights doctrine means at some point management has power that hits up against labor's power, and there's a barrier between the two. So when we get to short form or long form management's rights clauses, all those mean in either short or long form, we have some delineation of where management's power ends and labor's power begins. So in terms of setting the rights in terms of employment, management does most of that stuff. Labor pushes back and says we want these conditions, wages, benefits, etc. But generally speaking, management will come up with those terms. I'm not going to read this to you. It's right out of your text, but here's an example of a long-form clause, and it basically says what the company's rights are. In this case, it's a manufacturing firm. Now, we talk about what we refer to as successor employers. And what that means is, let's say, for example, you sold your factory to somebody else. For example, our good friends at Fiat Chrysler are getting ready to merge with another automaker. That automaker's name is Peugeot. It sounds like people who are sophisticated don't shop at Target, they shop at Target. And they drive their Peugeot to Target to buy their, I don't know, something else with a French-sounding name. Because you shop at Target, you buy nice stuff. When it comes down to a successor employer, however, though, we have to think about things. Well, we've already got the United Auto Workers who are operating in this factory. It's now owned by Peugeot. Is the factory doing the same thing that it did before Peugeot took over? Yeah, they're still making cars. You might even be using the same assembly lines. You might even be putting the same emblems on the cars. Maybe they're still Ram pickups, for example. So the things that we think about, how many people did you keep when you bought the company? Did you move the location or not? Are you serving a different audience than you served before, for example? Have you kept the same management? The more that you keep the same, the greater the argument is that the successor employer has to bargain with the union on the terms in which they negotiated with the previous employer. That stuff comes into place. And what we have is referred to as a successor, man, this is hard to talk today. Successorship clause. Can you say that 3 times real fast? Can anybody say that 3 times real fast? It's hard. It's really hard. It's like saying Sunshine City really fast. Yeah, give it a shot. Yeah. That's why I'm not recording that one, saying it very fast. But what it comes down to, guys, if you negotiated a successorship clause with your employer, it means if somebody else buys the company, the union still has some sort of intactness. It means how many of the conditions that you currently have will still be in place. There have been times, guys, when unions, for example, made such high demands of companies that the companies have closed down. The best example I can think of, the maker of our beloved Twinkies, Hostess Foods, which closed, ended up being consumed by another company. They ended up becoming intellectual property of somebody else. As far as I know, the factory is still shuttered, and that product is now produced in a different place, which means it's being produced by people who are not members of a labor union, because the successorship clause did not apply in that case. We have something called the Bidisco decision. All these tough to say words today. It's amazing. It means, for example, that if you've got a bankrupt firm and they're trying to get out of the terms of their labor contract, if they're in a position where basically they cannot make money, it's impossible to financially operate under the terms of a current labor agreement, they can scrap it. But they also have to bargain in good faith. That's the Cliff's Notes for the Bidisco decision. So many hard words today. So if you cannot make a profit, if you cannot reasonably operate under the terms and conditions of the current agreement, and you are operating in good faith, you can get out from under a labor agreement that is killing you if you are a company that's going bankrupt, for example. So in terms of other things that can happen here, we talked about unfair labor practices, for example, whether it's on the part of the union or the employer. We can have the NLRB give us a cease and desist order, which means if you're engaged in unfair labor practices, if the agreement has, the conversation has too many per se violations and everything else, the NLRB can come in and basically say, look guys, knock it off, or we'll actually monitor this. We can actually come in and post rights and inform employees on the law. And for example, in the course of bargaining, if you fired people who were members of the union because of the way they were negotiating, the NLRB can come back in and say a remedy to this is to reinstate these folks and to give them back pay. So bad faith bargaining can have repercussions as well. If we get through all of this stuff, guys, we get through this hard-nosed negotiation, and we get down to the idea of ratification, what this means is we're going to take a vote on the agreement. Union and labor sat down, they hashed this out, we're going to ratify it, which means the members of the union who are the negotiating team have to take this back to the rank and file to vote on it. Here's the things that affect ratification. Number one is, was it a good deal? Did you get what you were asking for? Number two, if there's an opportunity to get a job somewhere else, especially other employment opportunities, and they're not happy with the terms of the contract, or they're happy with the terms of the contract, that may affect how they vote. If they're happy with the terms of the contract, but they believe as a union member that the company is ultimately going to go under because of of how much they're asking for, they may still vote for the contract, knowing they have somewhere else to go if the company dries up. The politics of the union itself, for example, can affect it. Well, this guy who negotiated, this Tonkin dude who was negotiating as part of the union, I don't trust him. I don't think he got us a good deal. I'm not voting for this contract. Or conversely, this Ryan fella, he's a very trustworthy guy. We like him. We know he was a good key negotiator. We're going to vote for it. And also, the negotiating team itself, if you're able to come as a group and say, look, guys, we got you the best deal we could, vote for this contract. That could affect whether or not people actually vote for it in the long term as well. Guys, that ends our lecture for today. Here's what we're going to do. On Wednesday, we're going to review this chapter, and we're going to vote on when the second exam is. I'm going to check on the alternative idea for the final, see if that's something we can do or not. This Friday, do you have class? No. You do not. You get the day off. I will see you on Wednesday, guys.